1863, Gettysburg. The Soldiers' National Cemetery, a new cemetery, to bury the dead that were left behind at Gettysburg. I was there on the 18th of November in the evening, arriving at supper time. I had supper with Mr. Wills and some of the dignitaries that were there for the next day. After I finished supper, I went to my room, and there I started rewriting those few appropriate remarks I was asked to make. There were some corrections that I wanted to make. There were really no changes in the words, but I had the last sentence to finish. And I hadn't quite yet know what I wanted to say. But I went to my room and I asked William, my servant, who came with me from Washington, and I asked William to go downstairs and ask Mr. Wills for a couple sheets of paper. And he asked me, well, what kind of paper do you want? And I said, well, we're both lawyers. He'll know exactly what I want. And so William went down, brought those pieces of paper back to me, and I rewrote a very clean address, as you know it. The next morning, at 10 o'clock, I went out on the procession to the cemetery, and after listening to a 2-hour oration by Edward Everett, and after he described every single battle there had been in those 3 days, there was nothing for me to say about the battle itself. What I had to say was something to my countrymen, and a question in my mind: do the countrymen have enough patriotism and enough love for this country to take this war to its complete, final conclusion, and to keep this country together as one, and to free 4 million slaves? That was a question I had, and that was part of what I wanted to say something about in those few appropriate remarks. And it was then I was introduced by my good friend Ward Lamon, and Mr. Lamon, as I stepped up, and I handed him, of course, my hat, which I had, and of course he took my hat. And this is what I said on that occasion: 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We're met on a great battlefield of that war. We've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note no longer remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be dedicated here to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. To see this war kept on. March the 4th, 1865, for the second time, I addressed my nation Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war shall speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth of the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by one drawn by the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who has borne the battle, and his widow and orphan, to do all, to achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Ladies and gentlemen, 620,000 plus men died in the Civil War, both sides. 1.4 million were casualties in this war. It touched every family in this United States, North and South alike. Both sides fought for a cause they firmly believed in. There shall be no retribution. There shall be no punishment, because each fought for that side. Out of that great tragedy of the Civil War came the greatest nation in the world. And from that time on, from those men who perished in that war, and all the servicemen who have been there steadfastly, ready to give their life for their country, to keep us free, you and I, so that we can come out here like this and enjoy our freedom that those before us gave their lives for us to have. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We're glad to have you here. Indeed.